Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Friday, December the 15th. And today we're going to catch up with politics and catch up with a very exciting 2023 and look a little bit ahead to 2024 with our friend Richard Baehr from the American Thinker. Richard, it's always great to have you. Welcome.
Pleasure to be back, Silvio.
How is the weather in the Windy City? I'm not the political weather, but I mean the real weather.
So far, it's been a global warming early winter season.
Okay.
So no complaints really from anyone here.
Okay. All right. And how are the sports teams? The Bears, not too good, right?
Yeah, we should probably change subjects at this point.
That's right. Yeah, I'll get off that one. Yeah, I'll get off that one.
We're 0 for 5 in terms of teams with playoff prospects.
Yeah, we seem to be going in opposite directions.
Yeah.
Our section and your city. All right. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about what a crazy year this has been, especially for presidential politics. But I want to begin with October 7th. Obviously, the terrible tragedy, terrorist act, and lots of innocent people killed. But what happened after? The reaction at the universities, what we have seen, these 3 college presidents. I think that these people have we've taken off their mask. We now know who they are. And whether they're anti-Semitic or just hate Israel, I don't know. But I think it's very troubling what's happening in our universities and the administrators, Richard.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's become evident in the last 2 months is that this sort of coalition of the left has some natural tendencies to break apart. And one of them is Israel. When Chuck Schumer goes to the Senate floor and says all his former allies are now essentially condemning Israel and taking the side of Hamas, that's bothersome. I mean, Schumer has never been considered a profile in courage. So for him to come to the Senate floor and say that is remarkable in its own stead. But there are lots of articles that you can read about people who, the women's movement, who are shocked to find out that the Me Too movement and the women's movement counts for everybody except Jewish women in Israel who were raped or tortured or burned alive or seen their kids' heads cut off. And then you get to academia itself, where the supposedly diversity, equity, inclusion movement seems to not include any kind of respect or protection for Jewish students on campus, who are in fairly significant numbers at a lot of schools and have had really an awful experience the last couple of months with university administrators seemingly fearful that they don't want to antagonize the groups that they're really most connected to and most care about, which is the left and people who live by identity politics, so members of the groups that are considered those that are fragile and need protection. Which apparently Jews do not. And I'm not advocating that Jews become a victim group. I really don't want the university to protect Jews because they're a group that needs to be protected. They should be treated like everybody else. And in fact, nobody should be advantaged or disadvantaged in terms of how the university deals with them. And certainly shouldn't be because of one's race, ethnicity, or religion.
Right. Well, I think another thing, too, that must be alarming to these universities is they're finding out that a lot of their money comes from Jewish American families, like this Huntsman family that decided not to write a check.
Right.
But I actually think, Richard, that is the best way to get the universities to change, is by holding back the money. But what I thought was most shameful of all was when you had students, Jewish American students, hiding in rooms, fearing for their safety. And I keep asking myself, what would have been the reaction of some of these groups if, let's say, they had, let's say, blacks hiding in rooms because they were under. I mean, I think the presidents would have been angry, or the university.
Oh, yeah.
President.
There's no comparison in what the treatment would have been, because there are protected groups and there are others who were regarded as oppressors or supremacists. And you don't want to be in either of the latter two categories at this point, because you're simply not going to get a fair shake on campus. But, as far as the money, I want to make a comment about that. Huntsman actually is not Jewish. I think he's Mormon, but there are
You're right.
lots
He is, because he ran for president. I remember.
right.
Yeah, you're right. I stand
Right.
corrected. Yeah.
But there are lots of heavyweight Jewish donors, University of Pennsylvania, at Harvard, Columbia, MIT, who have started putting pressure on. And one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, why give to universities? These are the wealthiest not-for-profit institutions in America. I mean, Harvard's got an endowment of $50 billion. I mean, MIT's a piker because they're only like $15 billion. These are not organizations that are crying for funds. If you want to look for philanthropic intent where you can actually help people in need or people who are having a tough time, it wouldn't be the major universities. But, people who have made billions like to throw the money around. They like to, have a building named after them because we're all mortal and the building maybe will be immortal. But they're realizing now what they've been supporting. And they've been supporting really not only lunacy to some extent, but really hardcore anti-Semitism. I mean, the fact that at Harvard, the very night of October 7th, 30 organizations on campus were already out with a statement. This was before Israel responded in any way to the attacks. There was no invasion of Gaza. There was no bombing. There was no ground troops. But within the first few hours, 30 groups already prepared a statement claiming that the attacks were justified.
Right.
So you're justifying the slaughter of 1,200 people, which could have been 10 or 20,000 if they had killed everybody they wanted to kill in every one of those small communities. So it's staggering to think that people are so quick to defend an action by someone they view as on their side that they don't even think about what the action is that they're supporting.
But I would argue too, and you're exactly right, but I would also add to that you couldn't have organizations like that or the school would not allow organizations like, for example, if there had, let's say, for example, there had been an attack on a bus of illegal immigrants on the border, let's say, and a bunch of college groups came out saying, hey, we support that. That was exactly what we needed to do. Right. The universities, Harvard or whatever, would have never allowed groups like that to exist. Yeah. Their license or whatever would have been taken away. So the fact that these groups exist in the first place really shows me that the leaders of these universities are either tone deaf or maybe they agree with these groups. You got to consider that too. Yeah. And so it just, I tell you, I love two things about everything that I've seen in the universities. Number one, I love the idea of queers for Palestine. To me, that's got to be the headline of the year, queers for Palestine. I just
they do well in that environment.
But I mean, the fact that nobody has tapped them in the head and said, not a good idea for you to be, because queers don't do real well in that part of the world or whatever. No. But the other thing that impresses me, Richard, maybe you have an answer to this. Where did they get all those Palestine flags from?
Yeah,
I am sitting there saying, what business opportunity did I miss in my life? I mean, these flags go up like this.
Yeah. No, it is quite amazing. It's and the technology obviously is beyond me, but also it seems like the supply chain problems have all disintegrated when it comes to the flags needed for demonstrations. But I want to follow up on one point you made, which is, can you imagine if there actually was a white supremacist group who wanted to have an event on campus in which they applauded the history of the KKK? That sounds ridiculous. Of course, the college would not allow that. But they did at Penn, they allowed a conference to eliminate the state of Israel just a week or 10 days before October 7th, in which included were people like Roger Waters, the singer, who is one of the most virulent anti-Semites in the world. And they knew who was coming. They knew who was speaking. They knew who these people were. They're all discredited. And yet free speech ruled the day, because you don't want to close down the ability of even the worst opinion to be on campus. But that's not true. Exactly like you said, there's hypocrisy galore in the decisions about who to go after, who to prevent speaking, and who to allow speaking.
but the good thing, I mean, not the good thing, but what happened on October 7th was horrible. But I mean, if there is any silver lining to all of this, and I have to be careful how I say that because 1,200 people were
Right.
killed.
Sure.
But what I'm saying is that what we used to call hypocrisy, when for example, they wouldn't let that young woman speak because she believes that men and women should play in different places.
Right.
The hypocrisy has been exposed. They can no longer say
Right.
we have the same rules because everybody knows they don't. So
Right.
the mask of I don't know if this is correct, but the mask of hypocrisy, we all know they're hypocrites right now.
Right.
And they can no longer deny it, Richard.
Right. It's going to be a difficult struggle, though, because this toxic DEI infrastructure has been implanted in not only the elite colleges, but pretty much everywhere across the country. I mean, maybe Hillsdale College is an exception, or this University of Austin, Texas, which is being developed by a group of people who it's supposedly an alternative, free-thinking school. I wish them luck, because you're going to need alternatives, or people are still going to wind up applying because they still think the degree has prestige, even if the basic core content is poisonous at this point.
Well, I know that here in Texas, the legislature and the governor signed the law eliminating many of these diversity.
Florida too.
Yeah, and so that here will be a little bit less.
Yeah.
But you still have, I mean, University of Texas had Palestine flags,
Right.
and that was probably the worst case of all. The other universities have not had as much, but I thought it was funny, maybe not funny, but appropriate that somebody said that you don't see these marches in community colleges.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because the students are working.
Yeah,
maybe it's because they're actually busy.
Yeah, the other thing is that they came out was the grade inflation at these elite schools.
Yes,
where 80 to 90% of the grades given are A or A minus. It's like when everybody's a genius, nobody's a genius, I guess.
Right. Well, I just, I remember telling a friend that I could probably, when I was watching clips of those ladies, the lady presidents being interviewed, I said to a friend, I could probably bet and win any bet that I know exactly how 90% of these administrators voted in the last elections.
At least 90%. At least 90%.
At least 90%. I know how they feel about Roe v. Wade. I can bet on it and win. I know how they feel about just about all these issues, because you could almost tell it's like these people just hang around with others who agree with them. So
and hiring them, the
yes.
People will only hire people who agree with them. You can't get graduate degrees and have a professor who will sponsor you and he'll be your doctoral advisor unless essentially they think you're going to join the ranks and believe the same thing, teach the same thing, and follow up with your future students in the future to keep the pipeline going. I mean, these are people who have taken over these institutions and they have no interest whatsoever in sharing that or losing any of the power or control they have.
Right. No, the only way you can do it is through money or legislatures. That's the only way you can break it, or at least put the brakes on it. But I think to follow up on that, there's this story of a young boy in a Seattle public school who was failed by his teacher because one of the questions and the quiz or whatever was, the question was, only women can get pregnant, or men cannot get pregnant, something like that. So the student voted, of course, men cannot get pregnant. I mean, and the teacher failed him. And the mother is like saying, wait a minute, why are you failing my students? But that is another, because this is also happening in public schools. Now, of course, the advantage of the public schools is that the parents can move them to an alternative school like homeschooling or school choice, which is growing. And I think one of the reasons it's growing so much is because of crazy teachers like that one in Seattle. But I missed something really big in my life. I should have gone into the business of Palestine flags because I think I would have done very well. I could have secured my retirement just on that business alone.
I'm wondering how many pronouns are associated with that Seattle teacher.
Yes. Yes,
I guess
absolutely.
This is a long collection.
Yes, quite a few, like a long list of them. But it's funny because now you do get letters. Like I got a letter the other day from a publisher, and the lady's name who sent the letter, in the bottom she said, preferred pronouns, she and her or something like that. And I looked at that and I said, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But I guess in some companies, they have you do that.
Right.
Put in your preferred pronoun. Well, let's switch a little bit so that we don't run out of time. Let's talk a little bit about the politics.
Sure.
We began 2023, Richard, with sort of an assumption that Trump was unelectable. And now we finished 2023 with Trump leading Biden in most of these polls. It's now, in some cases, over the margin of error, so it's no longer that. And if the election were held today, I think he would do a little bit better than 2016. Now, the question for you is that because of Biden or is that because of Trump?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things going on. I mean, Trump at the beginning of 2023 seemed not nominatable, not only not electable, but not nominatable, or at least that he was an underdog, because you knew you had this new hot thing, which was DeSantis, who won by 19 points in Florida, which is unheard of because that had been one of the most competitive states in the country for decades. And there was a point where his poll numbers were equal to or even higher than Trump's. And, now Trump has an enormous lead, and the calendar may favor him because there is a significant percentage of Republicans who say they support Trump, who also say they might leave that if he's in fact convicted of some serious felonies. And there's enough cases going around and enough lousy jurisdictions to be Trump on trial that there's a pretty good chance that he's going to get convicted of something along the way. But if it comes in August or September and he appeals, so he's the nominee, he could get elected. Now, my own sense is that it's very high risk at this point for the Democrats to have Biden and for the Republicans to have Trump, because in one case you're looking at serious mental deterioration, which seems to be accelerating, and in the other, most of the commentary about the candidate is going to have to do with his legal troubles over the next 6 to 9 months, rather than policy differences or any other issues that have favored him in the past, like the border, which you'd think would be a natural thing, given the catastrophe over the last 3 years. So I still think it's a wild card going forward in that both parties have the potential to go another direction. And if one of them does and the other doesn't, the one that does, I think, will likely win.
Yes, interesting.
So
now, another thing, too, is the Robert Kennedy factor. I've seen, and you see a lot more polls than I do, but I've seen a couple where I saw one where he's as high as 15%.
Yeah,
I think
I've
that
seen
might
higher.
be. Yeah. Now, if that were to happen and you have Trump, Biden, and Robert Kennedy at numbers like that, this could be like Perot in 92, where Bill Clinton was elected with 43% of the popular vote, but a lot of the states. But one thing that I believe is helping Trump in all these moments is the comparison factor. That you have more and more people who are saying, it was pretty good with him. It's not good now,
right.
Especially the economy.
Right.
And it's not just the economy. I like to look at a lot of other reports too. You have, for example, and I'm sure you know this, bank car loans that are behind. You have more and more Americans behind in their consumer loans. Electricity, I'm sure it's going to be a huge problem in the north this winter. It's a big problem down here too, but we don't get as cold as you do. And all of these things are eating away at a family budget. So even if you have a drop on inflation or gasoline, as we have seen, there's still a lot of a big burden on the family budget, Richard.
And the perception of the economy is not great. Even if the numbers are so-so, the perception is that it's worse. And then you have the president going out and whispering, Bidenomics, it's working. And that simply is not doing the job.
No.
And, there's an interesting point about what you just made about the record. The Democrats are going to focus on the last 3 weeks of the Trump administration. In other words, anything surrounding January 6th, rather than anything in the 4 years minus 3 weeks that preceded that. And
Right.
that's because they think the strongest argument they have is that Trump's an authoritarian, democracy is at risk. In a second term, he would just be all vengeance and going after his enemies. And if Trump does have one problem he needs to address quickly, is he enjoys essentially making people go crazy about what he might do. So he taunts them. And that taunting, unfortunately, given the sort of the constitution of the national media at this point, which is about everything but Fox News hates his guts, is not helpful, because that will get through, whether it's through that media or social media. And he needs to be a little more adult and realize that if he's going to win this next election a second time, he's got to clean up his act a bit. And so far, he seems to enjoy the taking people, essentially taunting people.
Well, and the best recent example of that is that interview with Hannity, where Hannity says they're accusing you of being a dictator, and he says, "For one day, I will be."
Yeah,
I mean,
no, I mean, I get it. I mean, in 2016, I'm sure the same thing with you. I used to watch his rallies because this is so different than anything you've ever seen before. It was entertaining,
I thought he was so different in 2016 that he would evaporate eventually, because I said, this guy is like, we've never seen anything like this before, but he managed to win.
Right.
But I guess, right now, he does benefit from comparison. That's what people tell me.
I agree. And also the Democratic Party is
critical. Go ahead.
I mean, that Reed Teixeira, who's I think University of Texas for years, has said, the coalition of the ascendant, which was going to be what delivered the elections for Democrats for the next, 50 years or 100 years, is cratering. The groups that they thought were dependable and would always vote 60-40 or 70-30 for the Democrats, it's not the case. Those people actually respond to real economic conditions.
Well, and that's exactly right. The point I wanted to make also, and that is that in the case of Hispanics, they've been hard hit. A lot of them are middle class. Like if you go to South Texas and you start talking about climate change and fossil fuels, there's a lot of refineries where a lot of Hispanics work.
Good jobs,
Texas,
good paying
jobs. And all those truck drivers, refinery truck drivers. So a lot of this stuff hits home. I also think, and I don't know
the problem with those drivers, by the way, now they're all carrying Palestinian flags.
That's right. You don't see it. It's funny. You don't see a lot of Palestine flags in South Texas. I mean, it doesn't seem to be any great movement down there. But another thing, too, that I think Rui Teixeira mentioned, he's written several articles about this, but he wrote one, the one you sent around, and also another one, where he talked too a lot about how conservative Hispanics are. And on some of these social issues, they're not really on board.
Right.
If you mentioned to a Hispanic father that his daughter had to compete with a boy on the soccer field or on the swimming pool, I don't think that's going to go over very well. They're very conservative. But
on social issues,
on social issues, economics. I mean, they probably are more liberal, but certainly on social issues. But social issues is what gets people excited. I think sometimes
they're more emotional.
They're more emotional, absolutely. Well, Richard, I want to thank you so much for giving us a little time this afternoon. Do you have any? Oh, by the way, have you watched the White House Christmas video?
I've watched a part of it. I couldn't watch the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what that was all about. What was that about?
Who's making the decisions?
Yes, I mean, because I'm looking at that video, and the first thing is, this is supposed to be the Nutcracker. I mean, is that what they're saying it is? But you get the feeling that they're just like pandering to groups, or just a lot of crazy people are making decisions. And I didn't ask you about Hunter Biden, and part of it is because I haven't really followed it that much. I think I don't know if there's anything illegal here, but to me, there's some bad judgment on the president's part. I mean, if your son is going to be traveling with you and coming back with contracts, you would think you sit down with your son and say, hey, son, look, you don't do that because you're going to get me in trouble. I don't know if it's illegal, Maybe it is, maybe it isn't what he did, but somehow, people say he was just being a good father. No, I don't think a good father allows his son to use him like that. That's just my feeling.
No. I think the issue is that the father's role in this was access, essentially. So what does Hunter Biden have to sell? His skill, his business knowledge, his acumen? No. The only thing he had was a father who was a somebody in the administration. And whatever he did for them, even if he did nothing, selling access, it's not like he's the first person to have done it, but it looks tawdry.
It does. And if you're trying to sell or trying to impress people that you have contacts, nothing impresses people in other countries more than you get out of the vice presidential plane, because not too many people get to fly in those planes.
Mm-hmm.
So usually people who fly in those planes have some kind of contacts or access. So that's where I think, the argument is that Joe Biden was being a good father. And I personally, if one of my sons was all of a sudden making a lot of money, I would want to know, did you win the lottery or what did you do? Because so you get that feeling that he wasn't very strong with Hunter. That's my feeling.
Yeah, no, I think that's and again, given his family history, his wife and one child dying in a car accident, his oldest son dying of brain cancer, or I think it was brain cancer. I mean, he's had personal issues, so I'm sure he's close with his kids and wants them to do well, but not this way. I mean, when you get to be president, I don't think Obama would have been in, and I wasn't a huge fan of Obama, but I don't think you would have seen something like this if his kids were the same age.
You certainly don't see it with the Bush family, and they've had a lot more positions. I mean, they had the first one's a senator, then a president, and a governor. I mean, they've had a lot of prominent men in that family, and you've never heard anything about anything like this. I think there was a standard there that you knew that you had to engage in certain behavior. That standard, I don't think applied to Biden. I just don't think.
No, I agree.
Here.
Yeah, no, standards in general have been out the window the last few years.
Yes, that's right. Well, again, thank you. Merry Christmas to you and to your family.
Same to you, Silvio.
And I hope that we can chat again after the first of the year. And I'm going to encourage you, based on what we talked about today, check out my post tomorrow.
Okay.
I think that you'll enjoy my reference to the video.
All right, very good. We'll look for it. Thank you
very much. Thank you very much. Our good friend, Richard Baehr, one of the founders of the American Thinker and somebody that we value a great deal as a man who knows what's going on in the country, the politics and everything else. And I thought he gave us some great information today. Have a great day, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.